Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Danny Cipriani is one of England's greatest rugby talents, playing for England, Gloucester and Bath, among others, and doing it with such flair and brilliance. But it was his life off the field that dominated many headlines. His challenges with addictions and relationships with celebrity girlfriends put him back on the front pages as much as rugby put him onto the back ones. In his new book, Who Am I?, he shares the truth behind those headlines. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Danny. Now, Danny, great to see you. Love the book, love the honesty, love the fact you just gave yourself as hard a time as anyone else has ever given you.
Yeah.
But you kind of self-explored at the same time about who you are. And it's interesting reading it because I'm not going to compare you to Russell Brand, but in certain parts of his story, there are parallels. One, he rises and becomes this huge sort of celebrity figure. He's a bit of a sex addict, and you talk very openly about that in your book, and the way he talks about all the women he's sleeping with and so on may be unthinkable to a lot of people. To you, you're like, yeah, well, I've been there. I've led that kind of very promiscuous life. Just on that, when you come out the other end after being through that, do you ever look back and do you feel a sense of shame about it? Or do you feel, no, that was all part of me being a younger guy?
I carried a lot of shame for a while, and even though you're behaving in a way which you're trying to gain some momentary pleasure or some feel within it to feel good in that moment or release yourself from the chaotic nature of your mind, there often comes low and down periods off that as well, and you're then constantly trying to distract yourselves in other ways. I wouldn't have labelled myself an addict because then that's something else I've got to get over. But I was definitely always trying to feel better in some way, and I lent into some substance. I lent into frequenting women in the way I did. But by carrying the shame, when I met my beautiful wife and I bared all to her, and we went through some tough periods in 12 months because there was things within me that I held on to for so long because the nature of my behaviour actually stemmed from some form of pain, and I held on to that, and I did feel like I was one of the worst people in the world and carried all this shame. But when you find someone that sees you for you and shows you love, and I was able to sit with it and let that melt away, you know, I recognise it's just part of the past.
You see, interestingly, I've talked to Russell Brand over the years, different times of his life and career. And in the GQ one in 2006, he was his full promiscuous, boastful worst, as many people would see it. Very different character I interviewed later when he himself got married and then had kids and so on. Certainly abandoned a lot of that rhetoric. It looked like he'd sort of grown up, for want of a better phrase. But he's now facing trial, possibly a real one, but at the moment trial by media and social media. You've been in that position, not quite like he has, or for the same reasons, but you've been on the receiving end of a lot of judgmental stuff about you and how you lead your life. What's it like to be in the eye of a tabloid storm?
Yeah, so for me, the allegations weren't as serious as the ones that Russell are facing. It was often judgment on my behaviours and you know, immature and certain things that were behaving in my life. You know, but when you are in that middle of it and you're trying to figure out who you are, and those are snippets of your life that are getting written about, you know, it can really affect you and your psyche. You know, I've lived that through with Caroline and everything that happened to her, judged by social media, judged by how everyone's going on it. You know, the nature of the media, they know what they were doing in terms of revealing all these allegations, and now Russell's getting judged left, right and centre from everyone. And you know, you can't condone his behaviour.
Do you see parallels? Obviously, different circumstances, different allegations. But you and I were both talking to Caroline. You know, you obviously dated her, and you were very close to her, closer than I was. But I was trying to help her, give her some advice behind the scenes in that last period of her life, because I knew that she was. You could tell she was on the edge. You know, and it's very hard because she's the one on the receiving end of it, and it was vicious and relentless, and it led to the tragic eventuality of her taking her life. When you see that and you look at what's happening to Russell Brand, or we've seen it with Philip Schofield earlier this year, Hugh Edwards and others, do you feel sympathy for them regardless of the circumstance?
They're all separate instances, aren't they? They're all separate cases. Caroline was a 5-foot woman and her boyfriend was 6'5", and he was well within his right to protect himself in that fashion, and what transpired there was what happened. But the nature of how the media then turned on her, how they turn and they decide to create the whole fanfare around it, it does put the individual under pressure. But then ultimately, you know, we need to wait for the judicial process. We need to wait for the truth of that. But it's already happened now because social media and the media and every single news outlet is judging and critiquing people that are involved left, right and centre.
And it may be, in Russell Brand's case, that it's thoroughly deserved and he turns out to be this vile sexual predator that the allegations suggest, or it may be that he's not. And I just don't think we're quite there yet, because it's one version of events put forward by these women who should absolutely be listened to and respected, and they should have their say. But he's also entitled to defend himself, if necessary, in a court of law.
For sure. The only thing I can relate it to recently is the excerpts on my book and how people took certain snippets and created stories on the back of that. But when you read the whole book, it's a very different story. In this sense, you know, we need to wait for the judicial process and let that go down the line, because ultimately everyone now has a judgment on Russell, left or right, and it's splitting people. It's creating a real negative soundbite in our nation. But
well, it's very tribal, isn't it? Everyone's taking a view. Everyone's got to be one side or the other. I'm kind of in the middle, right? I'm not defending him, but nor am I saying he should be automatically cancelled from everything, because I don't think we've gone through proper due process yet.
Yeah, you can't condone the allegations whatsoever. They're very serious. So it is important that we let the judicial process go ahead, as you said.
You have a strange connection, not strange, it's just a connection, but you went out with Kirsty Gallagher, the TV presenter. Her sister is married to Russell Brand. Have you had any contact with Kirsty about this?
I haven't, no. I met Russell and, you know, he was a lovely, lovely guy, and he obviously had turned his life around. But, you know, at some point, you know, we need to find out more of the facts later down the line, rather than the trial continue in the fashion that it is.
Very hard for Kirsty's sister. I mean, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
They've already got 2 daughters, I think. Very tough for her, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be a tough situation for all involved, you know, and all it's doing is creating negative sound bites and negative conversations and more stuff in the media that people are going to just create more judgment and more critique on the whole scenario. We need to remember the victims involved in allegations that are serious, but we also need to wait for the due process rather than sitting here pointing fingers, making judgments, because ultimately that's the nature of the media and what they create.
It's actually social media is a bigger problem, because everyone's got an opinion. They all want to spew their opinions. They're incredibly judgmental, and there's no real restrictions on what people can do on social media. They can say what they like. I mean, I've seen people say the most terrible things about people all this year that I've known. A lot of it totally inaccurate.
Yeah, but the social media wouldn't kick in if the mainstream media didn't print the stories in such an early fashion in the way they have. You know, and this isn't a story. These are people's lives at risk. The victims who have the allegations have been made, and also against Russell. So rather than this become another story and another drama, we should wait for the judicial process, and we should wait for that to play out, because people's lives on both sides are all going to get affected.
You were my kind of sportsman. You played with flair. You were different. You didn't play by the normal rule book. You got into trouble a few times. You were a bit of a naughty boy. All my favourites, right? From Ian Botham to Ben Stokes to Gazza to George Bett, whoever it may be. I like sportsmen that are slightly flawed, if that's not a disrespectful thing to say. I'm reading your book. I love the fact that you're all those things, but also slightly vulnerable. I mean, when you got to the end of the book, what did you feel you learned about yourself?
For me, it was a very revealing process of going over times that for me, the sport part was easy. The training was the fun bit, the games was the fun bit, and I felt very in flow. I felt very in the moment, and I could go and express myself and play at an extremely high level. But my life off the field was disrupted a lot because of my own upbringing, my trauma involved, and everything that I'd been through. And also, I was going through life alone. I didn't have much port of call to turn to. So I was figuring out a lot of things on my own. So when I look back and went through the whole book, and I was able to share and express from a loving place and the wisdom of the experience, it was really cathartic to be able to release that, because I wasn't feeling the same constraints or the confliction that I felt at that point. So it shows that through time and moving on, you can let go and turn your pain into purpose and turn it into love.
Do you wish you were in the England team playing in the World Cup?
I'm enjoying watching it. I'd always love to be involved playing at some point, but for me, I'm enjoying watching it, and I'm enjoying this whole process and everything that's coming my way.
Well, Danny, a lot of people had views about you, good, bad and ugly. And when I read the more negative stuff, I judge people how I find them. right? You and I have had a lot of sort of chat over the years.
Yeah.
We don't really know each other, but we just have. We had various connections, Caroline and others. But the thing that I remember most about you, I had a friend of mine from my village called Wayne, who had terminal cancer, and he put on a rugby day to raise money for a cancer charity. And I just sent you a message saying if there's anything you could offer for the auction. And you sent a huge bag of stuff with your shirt, your boots, some tickets to games. It was a whole load of stuff, just like that. And I judged people how I found them, and you're one of the good guys. And he massively appreciated that and raised a lot of money off the back of it. So thank you for that.
No
I've
problem.
never had a chance to say it publicly.
I appreciate it.
But I appreciated that.
No.
And I love the book. I think the book, it's called Who Am I? I think the answer is you're probably a bit flawed, like all of us, but you're essentially a good bloke. And you've ended up in a good place.
Very much so.
And if I'd been running the England rugby team, you'd be there in the team.
I appreciate
Dazzling
it.
like you always used to.
It weren't too bad, was it?
It was great, mate. You were a great player. Good to see you.
Cheers, and you, mate.